Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Because of our wetter than normal spring and start to summer, we could see a higher number of insects that carry diseases. Today, Extension Equine Specialist Kris Hiney and veterinarian Barry Whitworth show us how this could impact the health of our horses.
So with a uptick in our mosquito population, there's a number of diseases that mosquitoes transmit. So we may see an increase in their disease incidence. So West Nile is one that comes to mind, but also all the equine encephalomyelitis, equine infectious anemia, anything that's transmitted by a biting insect. West Nile is a disease that we really don't want to mess around with. It actually has about a 35% fatality rate, and certainly can have some long-lasting impacts because it essentially affects the neurologic system of the horse. So it's a pretty severe disease.
Obviously the horses are bitten by a mosquito that's infected with the virus, and that's how they get the virus. And typically, if they do get sick, a lot of them will get the virus and never show any clinical signs of being ill. Those that do, they're pretty non-specific initially, maybe a fever, reluctance to eat, depression, those types of things.
Sort of the hallmarks are the neurologic, so ataxia, hind limb weakness, you might see a little stumbling behind, they may have more trouble getting up, and kind of some neurological deficits, also muscle tremors, so anything that's really going to affect the neuromuscular system of the horse.
The problem with the disease is we don't have a treatment. We just treat symptoms is what we do, so there's no cure that we have. So our best, as far as method of controlling it, is through vaccinations, really. And we do have a good vaccine. All owners should vaccinate their horses every year with this vaccine.
So it's actually a two-booster series so that we need to do for an unvaccinated horse. And we usually want to make sure that annually we vaccinate those horses as sort of the mosquito season starts. If populations are really severe and we're starting to see outbreaks, we might even increase to a 6-month protocol. And remember that your young horses and your older horses are more susceptible to West Nile, just like it is in people. So if you do suspect your horse has West Nile, you need to contact your veterinarian immediately. There's not any real treatment other than supportive care, but if that animal doesn't get supportive care, the chance of this being lethal is pretty high.
Do everything you can to control mosquitoes. Use some type of approved insecticide on your horse. You may want to put them up at certain times. If you've got a barn that's got screens on it that will keep the mosquitoes out.
So any stagnant water, overturn the buckets, putting goldfish in your water troughs that can eat the larvae. Also kind of think about when mosquitoes feed most frequently. So if your horses are on pasture, there's not as much you can do about it, but if you have a place to bring them in during the early morning or evening when it's peak mosquito feeding time. So right now we don't really have a lot of reported cases, but one thing I always recommend for horse owners, at least, if you want to stay aware of what diseases are in your area, there's actually an equine disease website, so you can actually go and sort of monitor. They will post reported disease incidents, so that's a great way to stay up to date.
We're here now with Justin Talley, our Extension livestock entomologist. And Justin, we want to dive in a little bit more and talk more about how pathogens are transmitted among animals and how this really works with insects.
Yeah, so it's very unique when you think about diseases and pathogens that cause disease. There's always this component called vectors, and the vectors in our case in Oklahoma are insects, and sometimes they can be ticks. But more importantly, the ones that we're concerned with now are those that can get in horses and cattle. In particular, we're thinking about vesicular stomatitis virus and West Nile virus.
And those two have been on our minds lately, of course. Dive into each of those a little bit more and kind of what options producers have.
Yeah, absolutely. So vesicular stomatitis virus is unique because it's a virus that can cause disease in both horses and cattle. And why it's unique, because when we look at the types of insects that are involved, it's a biting midge or a black fly. In Oklahoma, when it gets really hot and our ponds start to recede and you see muddy shorelines, that's where these midges like to develop and to lay their eggs. And so when you have an abundance of these types of midges and they can feed on an infected horse that could have vesicular stomatitis virus or VS, then they could transmit it to an uninfected horse or an uninfected cow.
So when we're talking about treatment options for the insects, not necessarily the animals who may be infected, what kind of options do producers have?
Yeah, so when we think about treatment options when we're trying to avoid insect bites, there are some preventative things that we need to think about, which means locating those animals away from where the insects are. So anywhere there's open pasture that some water resources are, then you want to locate those animals away from that, which means you put them in stables during the evening all the way through the night into the morning. Now, more complexity to the horse issue is that we tend to have only one kind of product that we continually treat, which is the pyrethroid-based products. Or we apply some kind of repellent in conjunction with some kind of pyrethroid spray to keep these both biting midges and mosquitoes off.
Let's talk about how West Nile is transmitted, and sometimes we hear about it more than other years.
Yeah, so when we think about West Nile virus in Oklahoma, there is a cyclical pattern that we see that involves a mosquito. And why that is because when mosquitoes feed on a particular bird, that's how they're picking up the West Nile virus. And then once that mosquito feeds off that bird, then they'll go feed on a horse or a human in some cases. But when we think about that, so it's really dependent about the bird cycle. And so when the mosquitoes that feed on those, that preferentially like to feed on those birds as well, then we have a lot of West Nile virus transmission.
Do producers have control options in particular with mosquitoes?
Yeah, in mosquitoes, the things that they really need to think about are eliminating water. Any kind of standing water, that's going to be your first step. The second step is to do some management around your property to make sure there's no broadleaf weeds. There are thick patches of these broadleaf weeds. And then of course, lastly, you've got to treat your horse. And the main products that you can treat your horse with are with pyrethroid type products. They come in different formulations, any from a handheld sprayer bottle to wipes to concentrate sprays that you mix up into a tank, and then you can apply it to the horse. The main thing is you've got to make sure the horse is on that insecticide label, because even though you may have a product that is that's used for other animals, it has to have horse because horses can react to some of our insecticides.
Okay, Justin, thanks a lot. And for a link to that latest newsletter, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Welcome to the weekly Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. Heat levels have been miserable this past week. On Wednesday, the National Weather Service issued a heat advisory for 62 counties. This was because forecast temperatures were expected to be above 100 everywhere west of I-35. Along with the heat was crippling humidity levels, especially in the east, that made felt temperatures much higher. The wet bulb globe temperature risk was about as high as it could get this week. The Tuesday map shows red and black colors dominating. Red indicates a high risk and black an extreme risk to heat-related issues with humans. If this heat wave doesn't break soon, schools will have issues with activities such as football and band practices held outside with students who might not be acclimated to being in the heat. How about a little good news? August 5th should on average be the hottest day of the year. When looking at long-term averages, it should be cooling each week going forward. Also, even though we are incredibly hot right now, if we look back to the start of the year, we see that we have been pretty lucky in having cooler than normal temperatures in 5 of the 7 months. Only January and April were slightly hotter than normal. Gary's up now with information on the rapidly expanding drought in the state.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Heck, it might be 900 pounds by now. But drought is back in Oklahoma, and it's coming on strong across western Oklahoma. Let's not waste any time and get straight to the new Drought Monitor map. Here you can see that yellow color across the western half of Oklahoma, generally west of I-35. That is abnormally dry conditions. Now that brown and darker brown areas, those are moderate and severe drought areas, again intensifying rapidly across the state during this flash drought situation. It's easy to see why this flash drought is occurring if we look at the 30 and 60-day rainfall maps from the Mesonet. The 30-day map shows very little rainfall, generally less than a half of an inch across the western half of the state. Relative to normal, we're talking in some cases pretty much down to 0% of normal for the month. If we look at the percent of normal statistics over that same time frame, some of those are down to really close to 0% of normal over that last 30-day period. I won't show you the amounts for 60 days, but all you have to do is look at the colors on that 60-day percent of normal map. All those browns and oranges and reds, those are bad news for that part of the state. Now there is some good news, at least possibly. We do have increased odds of above normal precipitation for next week, at least according to the 6 to 10-day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Now here's the catch. Above normal rainfall for August is not really all that much, so we really need much above normal rainfall during this time frame to start to alleviate that flash drought that's continuing to develop across the western parts of the state. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Earlier this week, China was in the news yet again talking about imports and exports. And Kim, the tariffs have moved into other agricultural commodities too. Let's just dive in. Where are we?
I don't think much has changed over the last week. Maybe with the devaluation of the yen, that might have some impact. But if you look at wheat, on the average, China imports about 127 million bushels of wheat a year. That's just a little bit more than Oklahoma's wheat crop. Of that 127 million, only 38 million come from the United States. That's about 30% of China's imports. But on the 18-19 marketing year for wheat, 0 wheat was imported from the U.S. to China. And so you went from 30% to 0, which sounds like a lot, but you went from 38 million bushels to nothing. If you look at corn, they import about 144 million bushels. 23 million bushels from the United States. That's about 16%. Sounds significant, but 23 million bushels when over a 14 billion bushel crop. Give me a break here. So we went from 16% to 0, or 23 million to 0. Soybeans, now this is a little more important.
Right.
3.2 billion bushels is what they normally import. 1.1 billion from the United States, are 34%. Last year it was 528 million bushels, or about half of normal, and about 17%. So soybeans is significant, and I think it can have an impact on that.
So that's a lot of commodities that have the potential of not going to that market. Are there markets out there that are interested in the commodities that we have?
I mean, besides China,
Right,
you
right.
bet you. Our beans are going to other states. What's happening is China's buying essentially all of Brazilian exported beans. That brings other countries into the United States. Has the China deal impacted the prices? Yeah, it's impacted wheat prices a little bit. It's impacted corn prices a little bit, probably, and soybeans and cotton more, because we're moving less cotton there. We're picking up other markets, but not enough to make up of the total loss of China imports from the United States.
All of this is happening while the price of wheat across the U.S. is not what we want, and then producers are thinking about the next year's crop in there. Where should all this wheat go that we have right now if it's not going to China, if it's not going to other markets? Where can it go?
Well, right now, if you look at the quality of our wheat, we've got still millions of bushels of wheat under tarp. That's, the 15, 16 crops that's feed wheat. We need to move it in the feed market. Our wheat in Oklahoma this year averaged 11.3% protein. That means a lot of this crop needs to go into the feed market. We either need to export it as feed, or we need to feed it into our feed mills,
Right.
or our livestock feedlot.
We've been into a pinch like this before with low proteins and the world markets where they are. Are we going back down a path, say, that we've been in a couple of years ago as far as prices?
Yeah, as far as prices go, we've been in, you can go back to the 80s, you can go back to other, the 08, 9, 09, 10 marketing years. We had relatively low prices then because we had relatively poor quality product. Right. We worked through that, we'll work through this. But, however, I think we're going to have a more difficult time because you've got increased production in the Black Sea region and other importing countries. What we used to call third world countries, their economies have improved. They're improving a better product now, or producing a better product of wheat, and they're importing less. Now, overall imports are going up, but still, that market is saturated right now. So I think we're going to have a harder time working our way out of this situation than we have had in the past.
Last week you said if you can't produce wheat for $5, you might ought to look at another crop for a winter crop. What other markets are there for commodities out there that we could plant over the winter?
Well, that's a tough question because, cotton, they were looking at cotton prices are down below 50 in some areas. You've got the corn prices are in the tank, soybean prices are in the tank, sorghum prices are in the tank. You've got sesame and canola prices are relative, they're in the tank. Mm-hmm. So there's just not a lot out there to, go into. You can go back, 15, 20 years, we brought land out of pasture when we brought it into crop production. I think we may have to take some back the other way because you've got relatively good livestock prices and moving back in the direction that it was, 20, 25 years ago, rather than raising wheat, corn, beans, or milo on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Every year, just thousands, if not millions of dollars are spent on vaccines for beef cattle here in the United States. We know that the quality of those vaccines are going to be as good as they're ever going to be when we purchase them from our veterinarian or from the feed and supply store. Our responsibility, of course, is to try to maintain the quality of those vaccines until we eventually can inject it into those animals. Storing vaccines is very, very important. Most vaccines require that they're stored between 35 degrees and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're not sure, look on the inserts that comes along with the vaccine or look on the label that's on the box, and you'll see an area where it'll tell the recommended temperature that those vaccines need to be stored at. It's interesting that research that was done in Arkansas and in Idaho several years ago, where they actually went out to farms and ranches and monitored closely the temperature that refrigerators stayed in while the vaccine was being stored. In the case of the data coming from Arkansas, only about 26% of the refrigerators that they checked stayed within that temperature range of 35 to 45 degrees over 95% of the time. You see, data has shown us in other research trials that if we get considerably outside of those ranges, that the vaccine quality and its effectiveness falls off dramatically. We want to remember that it's not only during hot weather that we need to be concerned about what the temperature is that vaccine's being stored, but also in the dead of winter. If we have our refrigerator, say, out in the barn in a tack room, and we get one of those 0 to sub-zero nights, then that temperature may fall below the freezing mark, and we know that can be very, very damaging to the vaccines that we're using. So I think it's important that we spend just a little bit of money and buy our own thermometer to check our particular refrigeration where we're storing vaccines. Set it inside the refrigerator, and any time that you might be going past, you might just open the door and check just to see what that thermometer is reading. It's especially important on the hottest days of the summer to check, and certainly on the coldest nights of winter, so that you're not ruining the vaccine that you're spending money for and hoping to get some protection for your animals when you vaccinate with that particular vaccine. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Fish kills are one of the most dramatic and unpleasant things that can happen to you as a pond owner. They involve basically the fish suffocating from lack of dissolved oxygen. Oxygen is very scarce in ponds, and there are a variety of things that can use up that oxygen, and the fish will just go belly up on you in large numbers in very short order. Oxygen is both produced by plants and can be used by plants or the decomposition of dead plants. If a pond is perhaps deeper than average and we get into fall weather and the pond turns over, the organic matter in the bottom of the pond goes through a decomposition process in which oxygen is also absorbed. The main source of oxygen in a pond is photosynthesis during the daylight hours by either submerged higher plants or phytoplankton or algae in the water column. Photosynthesis produces oxygen during the daylight hours. Then the whole process reverses at night, and plants use some oxygen. Thankfully, not as generally as much as they produce, but they are users of oxygen at night. There's several different things you need to watch out for on a regular basis, especially during the warm months of the year and as we get into fall. The first would be an overly green appearance to the water. That would indicate that the phytoplankton bloom in the water column is getting too dense. Another common problem to watch out for in some ponds would be the takeover of floating plants such as duckweed. You never want to allow your pond to be totally blanketed because that shades out any photosynthesis down in the water column, and the plants may be perfectly happy on top producing lots of oxygen, but it's going off into the atmosphere. You want your photosynthesis down in the water column itself, so do not allow your pond to become coated by or covered up by a floating plant. If your pond is deeper than average, it may likely have stratified into a cold oxygen, zero oxygen layer on the bottom and a warm oxygen rich layer on the top. As the temperature difference decreases, there's no longer a separation based on temperature. That strong cold wind comes through, turns over the entire pond, and your fish can go belly up in a matter of an hour or less. Like everything else in pond management, you need to be ahead of the curve. Get to know what's going on in your pond. Be a regular visitor to your pond and look and see if anything different is happening. If it grew a lot this year, it's probably not going to grow less next year. It's probably going to keep growing. So don't let those kinds of things, year-to-year trends, catch up with you and cause problems with you in terms of oxygen or just overabundance in an ugly situation where a pond can become unfishable or unsightly.
Finally today, an organization in Stillwater is teaming up with the city and OSU Extension to teach people about something that is happening all around them all the time. And it just so happens it's our favorite topic, agriculture. SUNUP's Curtis Hare picks up the story from there.
Planting a garden of various flowers is a typical method to make a building look more attractive. But walk up the steps at the Stillwater Community Center, you'll notice that this garden is anything but typical.
Well, we've just started doing what we call demonstration crops. It's actually part of a broader landscaping strategy we had. We've been working on landscaping, and it seemed like there was an opportunity to do kind of an educational outreach element that we actually is part of our mission as well.
The Community Center partnered with OSU Extension and the City of Stillwater to put the garden project together. Sorghum, soybean, corn, and produce such as okra and squash are featured at the center. All Oklahoma crops.
But really it's about helping people understand what they're looking at when they're driving down the road. They can actually see what these different crops are, and they can see just within 30 seconds you can see the difference between milo and corn, and so it's a great educational opportunity for folks.
The crops are, anybody driving by will kind of perk their interest, but I think it's good for younger people to learn. There's information about these crops that they can read about, and it's interesting and important for them to learn about the history of the state of Oklahoma.
And I think what's so neat about this project is the community involvement, the community outreach, the just kind of thinking outside the box. We've actually been up here, we've cut some of the corn off and peeled it back so some kids could, you know, view it and see it and hold it. And so it's really been, I think, just something really exciting for us.
We've had people walk by and they look at the crops, they look at the signs, and they're going, oh, I was always wondering what that was.
Attracting people to the community center and teaching them what these crops are is only part of the plan. Another part is educating them on nutrition misconceptions of an Oklahoma staple, wheat.
What is it now? About an 8-year period of anxiety, I guess is the best way to put it, about wheat. Anxiety over just what is wheat, what is modern wheat, how does it differ from the wheat of the past. And so I thought this was a perfect opportunity to showcase what little differences there are.
The team planted both ancient and modern wheat to give the public a unique perspective.
I mean, we can show them all the pictures in the world, but to actually see them, feel them, and watch them grow, that's just a perfect opportunity. The nutritional, there's not a whole lot of differences. In productivity, there's huge differences. You know, it comes down to the point, well, can we really feed the world with those ancient grains? No, we cannot. This is a communication effort, and we wanted to reach a public that we don't often reach, and that's the non-agricultural public. We're so ingrained, pardon the pun, but we're certainly wired to reach that agricultural public. I do it daily, and it's actually refreshing to have that opportunity to touch another public and to educate them just like we would the agricultural public.
It kind of gets to kind of the soul searching of what the community center and really what Block 34 is all about, and is who we are as Oklahomans. And agriculture plays a huge role in the Oklahoma economy, and it's actually a very strong undertone in our entire culture. So we see this as a great win-win and a great opportunity to align kind of what's within us visually, and folks can kind of experience some of that ag reality of who we are.
In Payne County, I'm Curtis Hare.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.